I'm Kaylee, and today I'm going to talk about what led up to the Satanic Panic, both morally and historically. So, America has revolved around moral panics from its inception, from the Boston Tea Party of 1773 all the way through QAnon today. America has had very little respite from the constant anxiety and fingers pointing at cultural others, or often referred to as monsters in our culture, either real or imagined. So leading up to the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, culture was changing and evolving, largely due to the feminist movement, but also because of income necessity. And it is in fact traceable through popular entertainment of the time, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But because of a unique combo of socioeconomic and cultural upheaval and American attitudes, because it is very much its own thing, we got a perfect opportunity and storm for a moral panic. So to understand how the Satanic Panic spread like wildfire, it is pertinent that we understand what was going on in America at the time. So outrage culture and the projection of fear is something that is also very heavily ingrained in America. And the 1974 Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act made it very clear that child abuse was a big problem and it was not going away. And a very uncomfortable and unfortunate truth is that a lot of that abuse happens inside the home, and it is done by family members. And so, of course, in American style, we had to create a cultural other. Like I said earlier, sometimes referred to as a monster. This other has always existed. It's taken many forms, from the indigenous population when the colonialists first came over, to BIPOC community, to the queer community, to, in this case, Satanists. And this phenomenon was complicated by historical movements at the time. For example, in the 1970s, women were seeking financial independence, which led them to look for work outside the home in droves. And then a recession in the early 1980s made it an actual necessity for most families to have a two-person income to run their household, which led even more women to leave the house. And of course, because of this, we had a conservative counter backlash, and they really focused on the importance of a nuclear family and the guilt that they wanted mothers to feel for leaving their children during the day with professional caregivers. So of course, this counterculture pushback manifested itself in ways that are easily traceable through popular culture. And as a microcosm of this culture, I'd like to discuss 3 books. The first is Rosemary's Baby, which came out in 1967, and the premise of this book is basically that Rosemary, who was a relatively progressive woman of her era, moved into a building that her father figure, whose name was Hutch, didn't approve of. And when all is said and done, her punishment for moving into this building that her father figure didn't like was to be impregnated by Satan himself with the help of the friendly satanic cultists next door. The next book is The Satan Seller, which came out in 1972. And this book is supposed to be an autobiography, which has very much been debunked since it came out. And in this book, Mike Warnke talks about how he was supposedly tempted little by little into a satanic cult, where he eventually rose to a middle management level by recruiting more and more Satanists, quite like a multi-level marketing pyramid would look. And a really funny thing about this particular book is he describes Satanism as basically anything that was counter to religious Christian culture. So if the Christians did it, the Satanists did the exact opposite, no matter how ridiculous it was. The last book is Michelle Remembers, which came out in 1980. And this book is probably the most morally questionable and reprehensible book of all. Michelle and her then therapist, now husband, wrote this book about her deep dive into repressed memories that she had supposedly as a child of satanic ritual abuse. And it started where her mom gave her up because she wanted a freer life, and the abuse kept getting worse and worse until eventually she was rescued by a Mother Mary figure, of all things. And this Mother Mary figure cleansed Michelle's memory and her body of all of the scars that she had until decades later, when she had to remember because this ritual abuse was supposed to be cycling. So these time capsules of entertainment embody the conservative fears and lessons of the time, from listen to your dad to don't go against the mainstream culture lest you be tempted by Satan, to children will be abused if their mother is not present. So it really isn't all that surprising that all of this anxiety rose to the level of a moral panic that culminated in 1983 when a California mother accused her child care provider's son of molesting her son. The police didn't know what to do. They sent out 200 letters to families that were also in that daycare, and it created an absolute crisis. And so obviously there was need for more training on how to handle this type of situation, which then led to police and to social workers being trained by these exact texts that are not even in print anymore because they were so terrible. And believe the children became a very prominent phrase, but we didn't believe the children when they said nothing happened. We kept poking them and prodding them until they eventually came up with some sort of story that was exactly like what happened in those books. An entire generation of children who are now adults are recanting their stories, apologizing, and seeking therapy for the trauma that was imparted on them by the people that were supposed to take care of them, that were so afraid of the monster in the house that they created one of their own, that traumatized their children ever since. It's easy to see moral panics historically because hindsight is 20/20, but it is a lot harder to see them as they're unfolding in front of you. So it is my hope that you'll take this knowledge and use it to assess any kind of outrage that is happening in your community. Thank you so much for listening.